Our A&R guy was like, "Yeah, I think I could get I think I could get your music to him." And he did. A few months later, we were on the phone with Dave Grohl.
Welcome, everyone, to This Was the Scene, the podcast that looks back at the late 90s, early 2000 punk scene. I am your host, Mike Doyle. Before we start, it's fucking dead out there right now if you're in the creative space. So if you work for a company that needs to simplify what your product does or have a confusing service that your customers just don't understand, then you can check out some samples at drive80.com. That's my animation thing that I do. I've been doing explainers for 14 years. I've been freelancing for over 20 years. You can email me at mike@drive80.com. I can also send you samples and pricing. So yeah, I can visualize what you do in 60 seconds. So if you need that, then hit me up. Rye Coalition came out of Jersey City in the early 90s and quickly built a reputation as one of the most fearless and inventive bands in the post-hardcore world. They toured with heavyweights like Queens of the Stone Age, Foo Fighters, and the International Noise Conspiracy, earned praise from outlets including Spin, Pitchfork, and The Village Voice, and work with legendary producers Steve Albini and Dave Grohl. Their documentary, Rye Coalition, the story of the Hard Luck Five, became a cult favorite, cementing their status as one of the most underrated but widely respected bands of their era. Loud, chaotic, swagger-filled, and always a little dangerous, they were a group other musicians whispered about as a secret influence. If you know, you know. These guys were a name that I heard about years ago. I never really dove into them too much, but in the interview with Drew from Sleepy Time Trio, he brought them up, and I was like, oh, let me kind of add that to my list of names to reach out to. So I reached out to their Instagram, which you can go check out. It's just Rye Coalition on Instagram. And they got me in touch with Ralph. I got him on the Zoom, and this is what we chat about. John Hiltz, Gurn Blanston Records. What bands inspired their live show? Did their music stand for anything? Recording with Steve Albini. Recording with Dave Grohl. What did signing to DreamWorks do for the band? And a ton more. Recently, their bandmate Herb Wiley got diagnosed with ALS, so they have a GoFundMe, and I have a link in the show notes. And they have a 50,000 goal that they're getting close to. So if you want to go throw some money their way to help them out, that would be awesome. Again, the link is in the show notes. And be on the lookout for some of their old music that's going to be re-released digitally in 2026. And again, follow their Instagram, Rye Coalition. Lastly, if you want to support the podcast, you can go to thiswasthescene.com. There's a donate button up there. You can also go to patreon.com/thiswasthescene, and you can sign up for $1 a month just to be cool. On the donate page on thiswasthescene.com, there's a bunch of options on there like PayPal, Venmo, and things like that. So it would be really awesome to get some support. And for all those people who have supported me recently and through the years, you guys are awesome. It's every time I get an email that there's some donation, it really is fucking super cool. So thank you, and thank you to all you future donors. That's all I got to say, so feel free to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with anyone who'd love some punk rock nostalgia. With that said, let's get started. Drew is like, he was super cool. I never heard of Sleepy Time, and I even said that in the beginning. I was like, man, I never even heard of you guys, but it was a really cool interview. He was awesome, and I was like, if you guys ever played Jersey? He said no, but he was like, here's some bands. He said, we're like Rye Coalition. I was like, oh yeah, like I remember that band. And so I literally just after in the interview, I think I was emailing you guys to be like, hey, do you guys want to come on this?
That's awesome. Thanks. I'm glad Drew brought us up.
Yeah, dude. So let's get into it. The way I usually structure it, or the way I always structure it, is how you get involved in the scene, how the band starts. But let's go into how did you originally get involved in the Jersey scene?
So I got involved in the Jersey scene through Rye's drummer, Dave Lito. So Dave used to be in a band called Merrill, a hardcore band called Merrill. They had done some touring around New Jersey, the East Coast, played New York City a bunch of times. And Dave was really young at the time. He was like in 7th or 8th grade. So I didn't meet Dave until I was a sophomore in high school. We went to the same high school. I was really close with our guitar player, John Ganelli. We grew up together actually playing hockey. We met Dave. We were both really into music, but mostly into metal at that point. And then we met Dave, and I hit it off with Dave in a religion class. And I was like, this guy seems cool. And like, he was like, oh, let me share some music with you. And he made me this mixtape. And for me, this mixtape is still like pretty legendary. It had like music I had never heard before. So like Husker Du and Circus Lupus and Pinhead Gunpowder, and who else was on it? This band, this math rock band called Breadwinner. Like all these bands were on it, and I was just like, I had never heard anything like this before. And I shared it with John, and then we're like, John and I were in this sort of like really crappy. We started this really crappy, grungy band, based on like what we were listening to at the time. So it was a mix of like metal and grunge, and we didn't really know what we were doing. And we were looking to start something, and we asked Dave if he would come and jam, and he agreed. And then we started playing in John's basement, the three of us. Dave had never played drums before. I had never really sang before, other than like that short stint in that grungy metal band. Because Dave had played bass in Merrill, and his brother played drums. It was Dave's really first time playing drums, but he took to it really fast.
And that was in 90, what, two?
That was in 93. And so we started playing together when we were pretty young, 16, 17. John was still 15, I believe, at the time. And the way our bass player and guitar player got involved, Dave went to grammar school with Justin, our bass player. And we were looking for a bass player, and Dave had suggested Justin. And so Justin came aboard, and he suggested Herb, who he had played in some emo bands with and some hardcore bands with at the time. This was really at the same time of our exposure to like the scene that was going on in New Jersey at the time. And on the Lower East Side, I guess, particularly this place called The Squat that put on shows called ABC No Rio. It was on Rivington on the Lower East Side. I remember going to see shows, seeing bands like Rorschach. We saw Native Nods last show. There were bands in New Jersey. There was this band Grey House. Another place you would go and see shows besides like VFW halls in New Jersey. And it was at this guy's house, this guy, John Hiltz. John Hiltz was the drummer of Born Against, this band Born Against, who had broken up. But he started playing shows, doing shows at his house. Touring bands would come through there all the time.
Where was the house?
It was in Westfield, New Jersey.
Okay, yeah.
Which is kind of hard to believe, thinking back on it. It was this huge house. His parents had moved somewhere else, I'm not quite sure where, and left him this huge house. It was beautiful. Had a huge pool in the background, and all of these hardcore, post-hardcore bands, emo bands would come through, and the stop to play, or one of the stops to play in New Jersey, was John Hiltz's house. We got to see a ton of bands come through there. It was our exposure to all this type of music, particularly John and I, but all this type of music that we had never heard before. So stuff coming out of DC, stuff coming out of Olympia, Washington, stuff coming out of emo, coming out of the Midwest. Saw Happen Jazz there. Saw Hoover, this band Hoover from DC there. Saw Unwound there. Just tons of bands would come through and play shows there. And the capacity of that basement must have been at most 50 people, maybe. You probably pack 50 people in there. And most shows were packed with 50 people sweating in this little basement. It was really just being exposed to a ton of music at one time and beginning to realize what was possible for a band like us. It was so exciting. We were being exposed to political views and ideologies we had never heard before. Like we were being exposed to the first time to people who were vegan and vegetarian and straight edge, and like all of this was like all happening in like 93, 94 as we were trying to form our band and trying to figure out what we were going to sound like.
Wait, how old are you now? If you don't mind me asking.
Yeah, I'm 49 now.
Okay, so we're only about 3 years apart. Where my brain is going, as I'm just kind of like, I have, just the basic questions that I ask, but what I'm thinking, the shit that you guys are doing in these shows, like this paves the way for me getting involved. So like by the time I get involved in it in 97, the structure's there. It's still underground. It's at Legion halls and things, but the things that you guys did made it possible for us to do what we were doing. And then, then we did our shit and it paved the way for other bands after that. But it's just so cool to me just to hear that like you guys doing this and then thinking because you guys did all this shit, it made it possible for like us to play. So that was cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's really cool to hear that and to hear that in some way, like in some small way, we may have been part of that for like other bands, including yours, but it was like the same for us. As teenagers, being 16, 17, Herb was only 15, our guitar player Herb was only 15. Getting these shows was such a huge deal to us. Like being able to play in John Hiltz's basement was the biggest deal for us at the time. For us, it couldn't get any better than that, right? And, it was because of all the bands that had come through there before. And there was Gern Blanston Records. Gern Blanston Records was owned or founded out of New Jersey by Charles Maggio of Rorschach. He put out the early, all of the Native Nod stuff. It was mostly New Jersey stuff at first.
Oh, he put out a Real Life Story of a Teenage Rebellion by Weston.
Yeah, yeah. He put out the Weston stuff, Sticks and Stones. What else did Charles put? Obviously, all the Rorschach stuff. He was doing shows and putting on shows, but then was like running this record label. And he also put out the Merrill stuff. And that was our link to Charles because Dave was in Merrill as like a seventh grader. The other members of the band were older, but because they needed a bass player, his brother, who was the drummer of Merrill, I believe suggested Dave. And so Dave was really, really young when he started out. And that was one of the things about meeting Dave. He had played shows in like Richmond and Boston, and being 16 and being like, whoa, this guy is playing in like different places in the country for me, it was like mind blowing. I was like, there's this whole scene that exists out there. And so, yeah, it's so cool the way things are sort of passed down and the connections that are made, and you don't even sort of like really know, it's like it's this like really cool sort of web or branches on a tree, if you will.
So in high school, because it says, did you grow up in Jersey City?
Right outside of Jersey City. So Dave, Justin, and Herb grew up in Jersey City. I grew up in a town adjacent, Bayonne, and John grew up in a town adjacent to Jersey City too, in Secaucus. So like our home base was Jersey City. Yeah.
So it's just kind of like I'm just thinking about that time. So I grew up in Jefferson, which was by the Rockaway Mall. We were about 10 minutes from the Rockaway Mall. And so like we're in the middle of the woods. You guys are near the city, so it seems like there's actually two different viewpoints where we're surrounded by cows and lots of country roads and shit. And so when we start going to play stuff, it was just like we got out of our little shit town where we didn't really we got like I was pretty good. Like I would get along with most of the kids there, but all like my group of friends, we all got in the punk scene, and then we would go to these shows. And we're like, this is our fucking place to be. These are our people. And like for you being by the city, so it's like you could go into New Jersey and play Legion Halls, or you can go into the city. So it's like so close. So it's almost like maybe you got to get both worlds at that point.
I would say most of the stuff that I had seen in New York or went to see was probably at like ABC. It was amazing that they were doing it. It was like this, it was such a shithole, but just like it really was. It was this building that's falling apart. It was literally falling apart, and it's probably multi-million dollar building now. But yeah, they just ran this community event center out of it. That was really like our first show too, and nobody was there except the sound guy and his dog. But the fact that we were playing in New York City was such a huge deal to us. And that I had seen bands before there. I was like, wow, this is incredible. Yeah, and then seeing some shows at CB's early on during that time.
So when you guys start playing, then how does that lead to like? I mean, at this point, you're said you're what, 16?
Yeah, yeah.
Like at 16, like what are you thinking about when this band starts?
The only thing that we were thinking about the only thing that we could envision really in the beginning was getting to play these shows where we had seen other bands, right? And that was literally like, as we were talking about, VFW halls, playing ABC. We weren't even thinking in the beginning about playing outside of New Jersey. We had made a demo, like a cassette demo tape. We started to hand that out at shows, particularly people like to John Hiltz, because it was his house who was doing shows in Westfield. We knew he was in Born Against. He was in another band at the time, Grey House, who was pretty popular in the New Jersey scene. So we were trying to get it to people who could maybe help us or we felt like they had some sort of clout in the scene, maybe. We gave one to Charles. And another person who was a really, I think, influential in the beginning for us was this guy, Mike Simonetti. And Simonetti ran a label called Trouble Man Unlimited. He was putting out records. So he actually put out our first 7-inch.
Teenage dance session.
Yeah, he put that out. He was putting out bands from like all over the country at that point, but it was just starting out. Like we were one of the earliest releases that he put out. He was another person who was like really connected to the scene in New Jersey at that time. So it was really just trying to get our music in the hands of people who could maybe help us in some sort of way get shows. And Charles from Gern Blanston, he said, I remember when we gave him our demo, and I think we asked him to put out a 7-inch, and he didn't want to do it at first. He felt like we needed more time to develop as a band. We felt like, okay, it was disappointing, but that was fair. We were brand new. But he booked our first tour for us. And so he was probably in his early 20s, but, could have been an uncle for us at that time. Like he was a really kind of this sage guy who ran a record label and put out a bunch of records and had toured. Again, he was in his early 20s, but he might as well have been in his 50s to us because of all he had done. And he booked our first tour for us at the end of 94, the summer of 94.
Where'd you guys go?
I believe we did 17 or 18 dates. And we did it in, I want to say 21 days, 3 weeks, or a little over 3 weeks. And we did the whole country, wherever he got us shows, and he was pretty well connected because of the label. Back then, everything was done by snail mail, like writing letters or like getting on a landline and calling someone up. Do you do shows in your area? And I think shows a lot of times were either connected to people who were doing like zines, like fanzines at the time, or record labels maybe at the time. And those people would put on a lot of shows or put on shows in different places around the country. We did our first tour. We toured on a demo, our 5-song demo that we dubbed on our parents' stereo systems. We made 100 copies of the demo, and we bought a bunch of shirts from the Salvation Army and silk screened them ourselves. And that was our merchandise. That was what we had to sell. And that was our first tour. It was incredible. It opened my world to so much.
Where did you guys actually record it?
The demo or
The demo.
Yeah, so the demo was recorded by this guy. It's a really terrible recording. By this guy, his name was he went by the Pockets. His name was Pockets, or his nickname was Pockets. Pockets Banks, and he he was in Bayonne, in the town that I grew up in, and he was really the only one in the area that we knew because we didn't know anything to record, and so he agreed to record us, and we recorded and mixed in like one day. And it sounds terrible, but it did the job. It did the job. It documented the music.
Yeah, I was just trying to think of like all the studios that were popping up around that time and something like you ever hear of Portrait Studios, Chris Badami?
I've heard of it. We never recorded there, but I've heard of it.
Yeah, he had started recording. He was in a band called Gate and he started just recording and then he got into the punk scene and that really took off for him. Again, like the era where we started, I feel like we had a lot more options that were starting to grow. So you guys really, if there wasn't, I mean, if any like, I doubt any teenager's going to listen to this podcast, but it's just the amount of shit that they have now. I don't know. I liked that time period because you had to going through all that. It sound like an old guy thing, but it's like you had to earn it. You had to like go through all the shit and be like, it's not an easy way to do this, but it feels so gratifying after we've completed whatever we're doing.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Like, I think, our whole existence as a band from beginning to end, most of that was really done, I mean, with the help of a lot of other people who book shows, people who let us sleep on their floors, like people who put us up, people who made us food, like all of that stuff along the way. And that was something that was really beautiful about these shows too. It was like, people would try and feed you and give you a place to stay. They didn't know us from Adam. You're playing here, like we're gonna try and like help you out and try and help you get to the next place that you're going. But through Rye's whole existence, by and large, there were periods of time where like, you had sort of these smaller independent, like really independent, like booking agents who would book shows. But by and large, like we functioned without booking agents. Like we booked a lot of our own shows. We functioned for a long time, which makes sense too, until things got pretty unwieldy there at the end. But, we didn't have like any sort of manager or anything, like people who were sort of helping us in that way. It was all done by ourselves. And our trusty friend and roadie, really, who was the best, was willing to put up with all our shit and go with us on these ridiculous adventures.
How did you guys get because the Maximilian Kolbe, that stands out because that was Drew's band before starting, yeah, Sleepy Time Trio. So how did, like, I'm gonna kind of just go there and then start jumping into all the full releases or full lengths you guys do. But how'd you guys get connected with that? Because they were down south.
The way that we got connected, we didn't get connected with them personally. So a lot of the ways that we wound up on comps or like split 7 inches or things like that was like people would handwrite letters. Usually they would go to our drummer Dave because his parents' address was like listed as the contact. And they would say, or they would call landline and they would say, "Hey, do you want to be on this record?" And in the beginning, we kind of said yes to everything. "Oh, you want us to be on like this comp? Oh, you want us to be on like this record?" I remember hearing about Maximilian Kolbe, but I don't think we met them until either that record was like in the works or already recorded. We played a show with them. That's the way things sort of came to be, is like people would reach out and say, "Hey, do you want to do this thing?" And probably said, we probably didn't say no to anything in the beginning. And so I believe this label, Irony Records, put it out, I think.
Yeah, Irony, and then Irony Records, Irony Recordings, Renta Records.
Yeah, I know they just reached out to Dave. He was like, "Oh, you want to do this split with Maximilian Kolbe?" Yeah, okay. And that was it. It was as simple as that. And I think that was recorded on an I think that was recorded on an 8-track in John's basement by a friend of ours. That song that was on there.
So what are like shows like at this point? Like when you guys kind of figuring out your style, your sound, your stage show, like what does that look like?
Yeah, all of it. We knew that we wanted to be a band that was like very active live, right? That if you were coming to see us, we weren't just gonna kind of stand there, right? Like that we wanted to have a lot of presence and energy on stage. And I think where we took that from, or at least where I took some of that from, is seeing a band like Dave's band, Merrill, and like seeing them for the first time, and or a band like Rorschach, like Charles Maggio's band, and seeing them just like so intense and full of energy and moving all over the stage and like, at times like falling on one another. And then I remember seeing a video of Nation of Ulysses and just being like, holy shit, like look at this band. And they seemed beyond cool to me, right? They were like dressed like really, they were like really styled, but they were just a ball of energy on the stage. And it was like a fireball. And I was like, this is incredible. And so I think we took a lot of our stage energy from those places, being inspired by that sort of stuff. And our sound, I think we were sort of piecing together too. I think our earlier stuff, at the time, the term like emo was like just starting to like be thrown around. I can't believe what it's become in the American lexicon. I can't believe what emo has become, because emo was a word that was just starting to being used in the scene. It's hard to sort of think about this, but like some of our early music was like kind of tagged with being emo. Now, you think of emo now, or you think of emo that maybe came like even 5 years later, right? Is completely different. Like we're probably more akin to like what became screamo, maybe, especially in the very early stuff, the stuff that is in 94, 95. There's a lot of like loud, quiet dynamics, some sort of sing-songy melodies, and then some screaming that's coming at you. We're hearing all this type of music because at that time you can have like bands on the bill, like I'm just sort of making this up as an example, like a band like Snapcase play with a band like Cap and Jazz. The bills were so mixed in terms of like the bands you were going to get that you were just seeing all this type of music at one time, right? And so it was really interesting in terms of what we were being exposed to musically. I think we were influenced a lot by what was coming out of DC and Discord for sure. Fugazi had a huge influence on us at the time. Like Hoover and Circus Lupus had a huge influence on us at the time. Nation of Ulysses, of course, like all that stuff was coming out of DC. And then stuff that was coming out of Chicago, out of Touch and Go, I think was a big influence for us too. Jesus Lizard and, some of the Big Black stuff. Shellac came on the scene at that time in like 90, I want to say it was 90, around 94, maybe 93, 94. And so all that stuff was having a huge impact on our sound and what we wanted to sound like as a band because we were really figuring that out. We didn't know exactly who we were or what our sound was yet. And so you take in what you're listening to, and we tried to make that as our own as much as possible. It wasn't this idea of ever wanting to like ape anything or rip anything off. It was just like that's influencing us. Like, you'd write a guitar part or there'd be a sung part of a song that would be sort of aligned or paralleled with like something that you definitely had heard before because this is what you were listening to. It was the stuff we were taking in.
Did you guys, because you mentioned Snapcase, and I'm thinking of just the hardcore scene and straight edge, and then you said veganism earlier. Did you guys have something that the band, like, did the band become something, have a theme that you guys stood for?
No. And that was like something that we were very conscious about early on, that we didn't want to do that
Why'd you guys decide that?
because we knew that like what was most important to us was like just playing music. I also think coming into it, particularly for John and I, because Dave and Justin had been kind of exposed before we were to like what the New Jersey scene, the hardcore scene had looked like and such. The political ideologies, or whether it was veganism or vegetarianism or straight edge, like that just wasn't a part of like the world that we had come from. And what we knew from the beginning is that we just like cared about the music first and foremost over everything. I think it was such a good learning experience to be exposed to all of that stuff. I think, or, I'll speak for myself and particularly, like, it really began to inform me about different views in society and different ideologies that I had just never been exposed to before. It was like a real learning experience. I might have not been vegan or vegetarian then, but interestingly enough, it's come around later in my life, and I've been for close to 10 years. So it's like, it's these sort of interesting things that like I'm so glad that we were exposed to that stuff, but we didn't have a stance. It was really all about the music for us. And that sort of in some ways, I think we felt like made us kind of outsiders a little bit.
Why? Like, what do you mean? Like with other bands or with the crowd?
Yeah, sometimes. And I think also being from the particular geographic area we were from in Hudson County too, you sort of have this spillover and mentality of like, kind of being like maybe a little brash, or early on we may have rubbed some people the wrong way because of our just like outspokenness or our sense of humor. Like I think Hudson County, in New York, there's just this like, I don't know. certain this attitude that sort of came with that. Not that we were trying to put that on in any way, but I think it could be jarring for some people at times, or at least that's what I've come to realize like in years later.
It might just be like just the Jersey vibe.
I think so.
Yeah. Like it's being, I live in North Carolina and I bring that down. I'm like, people are like, you're from New Jersey. You don't seem like that Jersey Shore people. And I go, that's not what we're like up there, but we're very direct. If I'm driving and someone cuts me or not cuts or just going slow, the amount of anger I have is like insane. And I catch it now and I laugh, but I'll just be like, bro. It just this like Jersey part comes out, and I think that's just a piece of us that we have. We just say what's on our mind, I think, but it's with like I don't think it's with I think it's with love. It's right. It's just being direct. Like let's just cut the bullshit. Like this is what I think, and it doesn't mean I hate you. It's just like this is what's on my fucking mind right now.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And like, in some ways that came, I think it could rub people the wrong way. So there's this zine back then. I'll give you an example of this. And I still think back on this at times and I'm like, oh man, that's so sad. But so there's a scene called Heart Attack at the time. And Heart Attack was out of Goleta, California. And this guy who ran this label called Ebullition, Ken McClard. And he ran this poll in 1995, like asking readers about all sorts of things like favorite live band, favorite new band, meanest band. And we were voted the second meanest band in 1995 in that scene poll. And I was like, man, were we really that bad? I didn't think we were, but
Real quick, if you're needing an explainer video, that's what I do for a living. My company is drive80.com. You can email me at mike@drive80.com for some samples and pricing. Industries that I've created explainer animations for over the last 14 years are tech, software, medical, pharma, recruiting, nonprofits, accounting, ed tech, and more. That's all I'm going to say. So now back to the show. Wait, do you remember? Actually, they have a website. It's a Heart Attack Archive. Was that an issue or was that just... It was obviously wasn't on a website.
no, it was an issue. So that was a paper zine at the time.
Man, I'll have to send this link to you to see if you can like if you want to find it if it's really on here. What did like was that because of your stage presence or off stage?
I think maybe a little bit of both, maybe some offstage stuff too. I don't know. I think back on it and I'm trying to think of anything that we might have particularly done that was like rude or it was certainly unintentional. And like, I don't know. I think it was the brashness and the sort of in your face kind of New Jersey thing that comes out at times.
Well, I know for me personally, like it's the surroundings that even now, like when I do stuff, I it's a reaction to what's going on that annoys me, and not like it's it comes from a place of when I see something and I think they're bullshitting me, I have a really internal thing against it, right? And I'm just like, don't fucking do that. And it comes from that, like with you guys, because I'm like watching videos of you guys on like YouTube. There's a documentary out, which I'm guessing you probably have seen. It's like 5 minutes long on YouTube, and then like looking at your stage show, and you guys are when you're playing, it's like you're aggressive and it's awesome, and you're like there's like one where you guys are just like kind of kneeling down and getting in the crowd's face, kind of like what's the word? Trying to pull an emotion or a feeling out from what's going like that moment right there. Because talking to you, you're a pretty chill guy. And it's like there is something when you get on stage, there is something that comes out of you. And it's like you get 30 minutes or 45 minutes or an hour, and there's an explosion depending on who you are as a band. But this shit comes out, and people can think it defines who you are as a person. But you're like, no, but this did live inside me, and I need to get this out. And that's where people could be like, oh, you're aggressive in that sense, or it's the way you talk to people afterwards.
I think it was probably a combination of both, but I think what you said there is very true in terms of us being up there and us being really just full of energy on stage. And like over the course of time, I think there were periods on stage where myself in particular could be pretty confrontational. When I think about this in terms of the trajectory of the band, when we started, we were mostly kids from broken homes too. 4 out of the 5 of us, our parents were divorced or divorcing at the time. John and I, while we were in high school, Herb and Justin a little bit earlier. I think there was a lot of pain and sadness for all of us that got channeled into that live performance. just having this catharsis, having this discharge. And it was probably the healthiest way to really have channeled that at the time. I sometimes wonder if I didn't have Rye, what would have happened or how things would have turned out for me. Because we really bonded tightly together as a unit because it was so important to us. And it felt like it was all we had. We were so passionate about it and cared about it so much that when a lot of other things in our lives seemed very much in flux, or maybe we're sort of falling apart family wise or family of origin wise. And so I think a lot of that came out. And for me personally, Rye was always that, where a lot of emotion would come out, even like later into the band, like going into the later 90s. I think I became more confrontational as a singer.
Like on stage or just in your lyrics?
Yeah, yeah, on stage. And I think that too, like I really began to think because, part of it was getting those emotions out, right? But part of it was also like in my way, sort of being playful or antagonistic with the audience. And then I think people started to believe that we were really like that as people off stage too, which I like to think was very far from the truth. You can have someone being an asshole to you because they think you're an asshole because of the way that you present on stage, maybe, or something that you said on stage or something like that. I have to own that too, right? Like, so being confrontational at that time, was part of the performance for me. And I think that was a pretty distinct period of time for me too. Probably also related to what was going on in my life. I was working through, I think, a lot of difficult emotions. I was working through some mental health stuff at the time, and it was finding its way out in our performance and in our music. And I don't necessarily think in a destructive way. It's probably the healthiest way it could have come out. When I look back on that time, I look at my life outside of Rye and think, wow, oh my God, like you were really going through a lot at that time. And I'm so grateful to have had the music and have the band and have people come to see us or have any audience at that time too.
I mean, you got to think about it. I don't think I've ever thought of it this way. When you get on stage, there's four of you looking out to a crowd of X amount of people. And when you're starting to play, there's a piece of you where if they don't get it, you go a little bit harder. You're like, you got to sell it. Or there's a piece of you like, all right, motherfuckers, like let me do this. Or if they're giving it back to you, it makes you even more like, all right, now I'm really going to build on this. So there is this mentality, not like you versus them, but it is kind of, all right, we're in the spotlight right now. And it brings something out. I mean, I just know from playing on stage, there's just something about being on stage that just brings something out of you where you might not be like that off stage, but when you get on there, you're kind of like, this thing is just letting go and I'm not holding it down, man.
That's certainly true of our band. It would definitely come out or getting angry. And most bands have been there where you're playing to a show and there's 3 people there or 10 people there and you're giving it your all and they're just sort of like standing there. I think I would do things like sort of could take it out on the audience at times too, which is really silly considering like those are the 10 people who showed up.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. Like looking back on it, I'm like, it's just a discharge of like frustration. But yeah, this idea of like upping the ante when maybe the crowd's not sort of feeling you or something like that. Something we would do all the time. I think we felt like we were in competition a lot,
Mm.
even with other bands.
How did you think of that? Like, I know, because I was just gonna say, like, as you guys are going into the late '90s, the Jersey scene's definitely changing. I mean, that's the part of the scene that I got into, and that's what this whole podcast is about. Like, I loved that part of the scene, which was way different from what you started with in the early '90s. Like '94 compared to '97 was like fucking night and day. Going into that, how did you guys adapt to that? Like, were you into it, or were you kind of, we don't really like how this is going? Because then it's like the next thing is when the early 2000s happens and it really changes. And you're kind of like, what the fuck, man?
I think a lot of folks who were involved in the scene and who really played a role in, the development of Rye or Rye being able to get shows or Rye being able to record music and put it out. I think a lot of those folks had sort of like faded out of the scene. And by 96, John and I were both away at college, right? And so we weren't playing regularly. The only times we would get to play were on like winter break for a few weeks then. And we would typically try and write some songs. And then in the summers, we would get together and we would usually tour for a month. So I would say in that later period of the 90s, it's really hard for me to think past like 95 or 96, like us playing really any shows I mean, I'm sure we played a few, but not very many in the New Jersey scene. It was very much about, okay, we're going to tour in the summer, or we have this one-off show here in the city or up in Boston or, down in DC. I feel like we weren't kind of a part or didn't really know so much what was going on in the later 90s in New Jersey. I'm sure it was like night and day. I'm sure we would have felt like a fish out of water, maybe. I don't know. It's sort of interesting to think like around our time, like the earlier 90s, you had scenes in like, there was the Jersey scene, and then there was like kind of the Midwest scene that had like what I'm going to consider like your more brash, angular math rock kind of stuff. And then you had like the San Diego scene. You had a ton of bands that were coming out of San Diego at that time. And then you had what was going on in like the Northwest, right? And I feel like and some stuff in Boston too, Boston, DC too. But I feel like those at least kind of in the underground, not to say that there weren't scenes elsewhere. There were scenes everywhere, right? They were all over. But I feel like in terms of where a lot of music was coming out of that we were certainly exposed to, it was coming out of like those scenes that I had just mentioned: DC, Chicago, San Diego, Olympia, Washington, places like that.
When you guys were on the road, where were the places where you got the most, I would say like the most acceptance, but where did you love going back to?
It depends on what era of the band, because we were banned for like 13 years, and so we had a pretty long run. But Boston was always pretty good to us. Chicago, trying to think of where else. Seattle was always pretty decent to us. Of all places, Lincoln, Nebraska was really good to us early on. Lawrence, Kansas. So we would have some like interesting pockets where we'd be like, holy shit, there are a lot of people here. Why are there so many people here?
Were there any spots that you like were like, we hated going there?
Mostly anywhere through Texas, because most of our tours went through Texas, and it's obviously enormous, right? Drives are super long. Not a lot of people would come to shows. Like maybe usually Austin we would do okay. But other than that, through the South, Phoenix through Texas, like Phoenix, began to do okay after a while, but like Texas was just brutal. Going through like the southern part of the United States was just rough always. You knew it was going to be a haul.
So when you start putting out like in the late 90s, you start putting out full lengths, right? So you got, how do you say this? He saw Ducket?
He saw the cat.
He saw the cat?
Yeah, I know it doesn't read that way, but
Oh,
that's
he saw the cat.
yeah.
Oh, okay. So when you guys put that out, was that kind of exciting to have it be you're stepping out of 7 inches to go to like?
Yeah, that was super exciting for us. It was the first time we recorded in a real studio. We recorded in this studio called Mixolydian. We had recorded with a guy named Alap Momin, who was recording a lot of stuff at that time that was coming out of New Jersey in particular. He recorded a 7-inch already of ours, and he recorded a split LP that we did with this band named Carp out of Olympia, Washington. But we recorded it with him there, and it was the first time we recorded in like a real bona fide studio, and that was like an amazing experience. We went back there and with Alap to record the Lipstick Game as well, which was our second LP. But yeah, like just having a record out, like we never thought those things were going to be possible. First, it was like, oh, we get to play a cool show somewhere. Like we never thought we would be able to play like Hiltz's Basement, or eventually we got to play Maxwell's in Hoboken, which was like this legendary club that had existed for a long time. We got a 7-inch out. It was these stepping stones along the way that happened. And I don't know if we just never sort of believed like the band was going to continue to get more traction or bigger than it was. We continued to do more tours and such. So yeah, I felt like every step was like a big deal.
How much of the band, well, there's like, and I talked about this with Drew, where with Sleepy Time, it's kind of like they have their lives and the band kind of rides shotgun, right? So it's like I do this and then we play some shows and then I go back to my life and do this. Some bands are the driver is the band. And so for you guys, like what was the band for you?
I think for a long time, the band, with the exception of going to college, I would say, so that took precedent. We didn't know if we would exist after like 1995 because I was moving out to go to school in San Francisco and John was going to school in Ohio. So we thought we might not play together again. And then, as I said earlier, we managed to find a way to keep it going on breaks and stay really active during breaks. And we did that for like 4 or 5 years. I wound up actually in Ohio going to school at Oberlin with John eventually. So we were out there together, but we took a leave of absence to tour Europe in 97. The band always played a prominent role. Once we graduated from college in 99, we were sort of floundering around a bit. We didn't know what the next steps were going to be. Is it time to like start working a regular 9 to 5 gig or to try and find a career? Or, we were a little bit lost, I think. I decided to go to grad school at the time. We started to write songs for the album On Top, which was our third record. We started to see some of the bands that were our peers, and they were starting to gain a lot of traction in terms of like, they were playing to like a lot of people, and they were starting to sell what at that time seemed like a lot of records. And we we're like, damn, these bands are getting so popular. What are they doing that we're not doing? And so we made a decision at that point. It's like, okay, we're 22 around-ish. Let's just drop everything and be a band. We did that for the better part of like 2 years. Just was like, okay, we're just going to be a band. And toured pretty relentlessly during that time. Like I said, On Top, we recorded On Top, that album, our third album. Then an EP, wound up moving to a more established or prominent label at the time that had more resources. And so that helped us gain some visibility too. At that time, it was just going like full force, and the band was like full priority. It was the only priority. Like everyone in the band dropped everything, jobs, school, everything.
So did it, because I obviously have it up here who you guys recorded with. So you guys signed to Tiger Style Records and then you recorded with Steve Albini. Was the decision to go full on before you get this record deal and recording with Steve, or was this like, oh, we just got signed, we're recording with him, now we need to take this seriously, or just we need to go all in for 2 years, or whatever it's gonna be?
Yeah, it was before we signed to Tiger Style. The thing with the recording with Albini, we were actually meant to record our first album with Albini. I had approached him at a show, at a shellac show, got his number, and then that fell apart. But that was back in 96. We had wanted to record with Steve forever. I mean, that was like one of the dreams for the band. I was talking about these like sort of milestones or these like stepping stones of like, oh, wow, we're able to do this. Yeah, that's when we recorded On Top with Steve. And then the Tiger Style EP, Jersey Girls, that came after that was also recorded with Steve. But yeah, I mean, the Tiger Style thing certainly helped with like exposure for us for sure.
Getting that though, you're kind of like, all right, we got some backing here. Now we can do this. Because if you didn't have that and you're thinking, let's go full on, it would be a little bit like,
Yeah, it was definitely still like a grind, eating, a lot of shit and like just making ends meet. And a few of us were living together in a house. And, we basically got evicted from that house because we couldn't pay rent. And, we were still like just getting by and working odd jobs along the way to make ends meet between tours. And then by this time, it's like 2002, maybe 2001, probably 2001. We were playing with a lot of bands and friends with a lot of bands. So around that time, we were just talking about this earlier, but we did a stint with the Blood Brothers. We did a stint with like Mars Volta. We were playing like some pretty higher profile shows, I guess. We were getting better shows. We had, I think, more connections and with people who, were able to get in people's ears too, I think, about our band or what they thought about our band. While we were on Tiger Style, we landed a tour opening for Queens of the Stone Age. And that was Queens of the Stone Age was coming off songs, well, they were touring Songs for the Deaf, which was a huge album. I think the album that kind of maybe like broke them, maybe. I don't think that would have come along had we not been on Tiger Style, like, and had some of that exposure because we got a lot of press on that record, on Top. We got a call one day and said, do you want to do this run with Queens of the Stone Age? Like, we didn't know who, I mean, we knew who the band was, obviously, but we didn't know them as people. And so that seemed to come out of the blue for us. We were getting bigger tours, we were getting more traction. And then right around that time, we were approached by an A&R guy from DreamWorks who wanted to sign Rye to DreamWorks.
This is a huge. It's like such a crazy jump to watch that because I have it up here as it's I have it like bullet points. It's like 97 to 2000. It's like all right, local labels, and all of a sudden it's this jump, and then it's like Tiger Style, Steve Albini, and you release Jersey Girls EP to Sub Pop's Singles Club, and then it's like 2003 to 2006. Like holy shit, and Dave Grohl's name pops up. So that must have been pretty wild times.
It was. And, like we had already been a band at that point, but for like close to 10 years or something like that. Like we had been a band for a long time, or right about coming up to 10 years. You had this thing in the later 90s or mid 90s was like, this notion of being a sellout. That was the worst thing that you can be, like signed to a major label. And coming into the 2000s, the whole idea is that like if we could have done this on an indie, we certainly would have done it on an indie, and we couldn't at the time. Like just make a living, sustain a living, a normal living being in a band. Like that's the dream. That was the dream. And so when this opportunity came, we thought about DreamWorks in terms of like the bands that they had signed. So they had signed Jimmy Eat World, they had signed Elliott Smith, bands that to some degree had come from like our world. They had certainly signed in a lot of other bands too that weren't from our world, but they were a smaller major. And we were like, okay, like maybe this can work for us in terms of like, we thought we weren't going to have a radio hit, but we thought like, okay, if we could get some support in terms of touring, in terms of press, we're a band that can grind it out on the road and hopefully we'll be able to sustain some sort of living. And that was the idea, I think, when we signed. We basically found out on that Queens of Stone Age tour, I would say, that like it was really going to happen. They were really going to like wanted to sign the band. And then a few months later, they asked like, who would you want to record with? And we came up with a bunch of people we thought would be good or like dream producers. And Dave Grohl was not on that list initially. It's actually Josh Homme from Queens of the Stone Age who hadn't produced like anything at that point, but we're like, oh, he'd be cool to like work with and make a record with. He's a musician. And I think it was Herb who had floated the idea of Dave Grohl. Our A&R guy was like, yeah, I think I could get I think I could get your music to him. And he did. A few months later, we were on the phone with Dave Grohl and talking about making a record. It was just wild. It was wild.
So he produces Curses.
He produces Curses, yeah.
When you guys are doing that, so at what point, I mean, obviously he's already got Nirvana and then Foo Fighters. Which album was he already like three albums into Foo
Yeah,
Fighters?
something like that. Yeah. Yeah. Color and Shape had already come out and
Third one with the Fly bound and down and down and that Fly song. Oh my God.
Learn to Fly.
Learn to Fly. Yeah, yeah. Like I think that record came out.
Yeah, yeah. I think it was like three records. Yeah.
So like when you're in the studio with this guy, does it I don't know, is there like a part of you where you're excited but also being like, are we afraid that we're not going to be able to be ourselves because this guy is so big?
I think he was able to disarm that pretty quickly. The way that it worked was we met in person after a phone call. So Dave, not Dave Grohl, but Dave Lito, our drummer, and we talked to him on a phone call. And then he was like, "Hey, I'm going to be in New York City in like a few weeks. Why don't we meet?" And the whole band met with him. We went to lunch and just shot the shit. And he's super charming. He's super funny. He's very disarming. We really hit it off over lunch. Like, like thinking of that time, like thinking particularly of Nirvana or Dave's experience with Scream and like coming out of the whole DC scene, like he had done it. He had been touring in a band. He had eaten shit for a while, like, and then his life changed completely radically, right? And was really in the biggest band in the world and one of the biggest rock stars in the world. And so he was able to really put us at ease. And then maybe a month after that, he said, "Okay, come out to LA. We'll rehearse for 2 weeks and then we'll go into the studio." So we got out there. We had pretty much written the songs by that point. They were done. We were working towards writing the record and they were pretty much done. And then we rehearsed in the rehearsal space with him, and he would make some suggestions here and there, but not anything that like really changed the integrity of the songs, I don't think. By the time we got into the studio, like, we were really comfortable with one another. I look on that period of time like really fondly. I can't believe this is happening. It was all really exciting at the time. We actually thought at that time, like with his amount of popularity and clout, like that would sort of mean something too, which it ultimately didn't. But the experience itself was really fun. It was stressful at times too, because I personally put a lot of pressure on myself, thinking like, oh God, this is going to be, this major label record. And I was really hard on myself during the recording of that. Just, I think, really perfectionistic about things. And so while I really enjoyed the experience, and I think I could speak safely for the band with this, while we really enjoyed the experience, I think we were, in retrospect, weren't really happy with the way the recording sounded at the end.
I was gonna say that. Like, I was gonna say, did it elevate you guys at all, or did it not go in the way you wanted it to?
I think we were so caught up at the time of like, because there was also an engineer who worked on the record, also an awesome dude, this guy, Nick Reskolinix, and he has his own sort of history of producing too. But he was, had worked with Dave. He recorded a Foo Fighters record. He's done a number of stuff on his own. And, it was a really, like, it turned out to be a really polished record. And I think we had this mentality at the time that, all right, they must know better. If it's going to be marketed to a more mainstream audience or to a bigger audience for the first time, like, they must know how it's done. I think we were very naive in that regard. Most of the songs on that record I would stand by, like, we wrote them all. And there are some that I think are like, oh, I look back on them and I'm like, oh, I wish we like, wouldn't have put that on the record. It's kind of a dud. But I think the production of that record is something that we look back on and wish was different. We all agree that like it should have been like way more raw of a record. It was just, I think, too polished for us and too slick sounding. And, I really do think we were naive at the time, and thinking like, okay, like they absolutely know what they're doing. And I think they do. They clearly know what they're doing, but I don't know if that was the best fit for Rye at the time.
Well, it's interesting because it's like you see this kind of hockey stick effect if you're looking at the career in bullet points in front of me. And then it's like this huge jump and it goes up. It's like, you see the key words, Dave Grohl, Foo Fighters, and DreamWorks and all this. And then all of a sudden it's like, and then DreamWorks shuts down because by Universal Music Group, and then they shelve your record, and then you have to fight to get it back, and then you do. But it's almost one of those tales as old as time, as if bands were warned about. Did you see that book that came out called Sellout?
I've heard of it, no, but I haven't read it.
It's really good. It goes through the history of Jimmy Eat World, At the Drive-In,
Oh, really?
Against Me, oh yeah, My Chemical Romance. It's Thursday. It's a great book. It's the history of them. It's all these stories about, and then I think Rise Against was the only band in that book where they're like, we loved it. This was great. It worked out great for us. And everyone else was like, this wasn't what we were expecting. And it just made us shit the bed. So by doing that, and then, like I said, the Interscope shelves it and all that, what does that do to you guys? Because I think, what's 2006 where you officially break up?
Yeah, 2006.
Was all of that culminating to leading to that? Or were there other things where you're just at a certain amount of time, you're like, man, I've just been doing this too long. I just don't want to do this anymore.
I think the record being shelved. And so you're right. Rye was on three different record labels in a span of like 2 to 3 months. So we went from DreamWorks being bought, we were on Geffen for a hot minute. And then the next thing we would know, we were on Interscope. Everyone gets fired and let go, including our A&R guy, right? Like they kept very few bands on DreamWorks, Jimmy Eat World being one of them, but they kept very few. They kept us, at least in the beginning, Interscope, but they dropped a whole bunch of bands during that absorption. The only reason I think we were saved is because Dave Grohl's name was attached to the band at the time. They said, we don't think there's a hit yet. So this apparently was coming from the top, the way I understand it, that Jimmy Iovine said that they don't have their dirty deeds yet, meaning AC/DC's dirty deeds, right? Like they need to write a song like that. And so we pushed back and said the record's done. And they said, well, it's not ready to come out. We're not putting it out. We said, okay, we'll do two more songs. And we like literally, because we can be this way at times, we literally mapped out the song structure of Dirty Deeds and wrote our own version and gave them exactly what they were asking for. And they said, nope, not ready yet. And so then we said, all right, we're done. We're not doing this anymore. And that began the stalemate. And they wouldn't give us any money, like to tour or to support us in any way. We had nothing to release. And so it essentially crippled the band for 2 years where we couldn't do really anything. And so we were all hurting and angry and frustrated. I think started to do our own separate things. Like John, Herb, and Justin started playing together in a band called Black Hollies. Dave and I were really focused on trying to find a way to get the record back and didn't know if that would ever happen. And then eventually try and get it out once it did happen. And so that really just fractured the band. I think we were just so heartbroken and depleted and disappointed that we tried to go out and tour on Curses when it eventually did come out. Like our initial label, Charles Maggio and Gurm Blanston, put it out. Well, we did two tours. One, we wound up like doing a tour of Europe, half of which was opening for the Foo Fighters, which was really fun. You get to play to, depending on what the venue was, but up to 20,000 people every night. That was fun, right? And we were still friendly with Dave. And then we came home and did, I think, two tours. And we were just still like just scraping by. And it just became a point where like we imploded. We were taking it out on one another. We had to cut a tour short early. Dave's father-in-law had passed away. And so we came home and that was it. That was the end of it. We were officially broken up.
Do you remember the setting for where you guys broke up?
Yes, sort of. It was kind of informal, but it was at a show in Canada, somewhere in the province of Ontario. But yeah, I remember exactly. It was pretty much clear at that point when we were going home or we had to go home or had to cut the tour short. And I remember Justin sort of saying something. Justin and I had a conflict of some kind. I can't even remember what it was about exactly, and he had sort of expressed that like he wasn't going to do it anymore. I think to some degree we were all sort of we were all doubting the future of the band, but he was kind of the one to say like, I'm not doing this anymore. And then after that, it was like, that was it. I mean, there was no big discussion about the band being done or the band being broken up. We just came home and never played together again.
What was the internal feeling for you personally when that happened?
I was heartbroken. Heartbroken. I was devastated. I definitely had gone into a depression for a period of time, for sure. I didn't know what to do. Rye had become such a part of my life, and it felt like a part of my identity to a certain degree, and I didn't know what I was going to do with my life, right? Like I had no idea. I was lost. These were the closest people in my life who I knew, and they knew me better than anybody. And suddenly, like half of us weren't speaking anymore. Like we weren't having contact. You've been in a band, so it's like when you've done it for that long, like you're living day in and day out together. You're in a van all the time together, you're in a hotel together, you're spending all of your time together. And like we truly were friends. We were all friends. That just part of my life just disappeared. Yeah, I suffered a lot. I struggled a lot during that period of time to figure out what was next for me.
When you guys did the reunion show at Maxwell's in 2011, what brought that on?
Dave Lito's son. I want to say his fifth birthday. I could be wrong about the year of his birthday, but they had it in the like a public park in Jersey City, and four out of the five of us were there. And it was the first time that majority of the band had been in one spot. So this is probably like 2000, I want to say 10, maybe something like that. And it was the first time that the four of us had been in one place at one time. The only person who wasn't there was Justin. The following year, 2011, Dave's dad was going to be 70. And some of the woman, Jenny Matz, who had made the documentary of the band, she was there. She had asked him, Dave's dad, what do you want for your birthday? What's your one birthday wish? And he said, I'd love to see Rye Coalition play one more show. Yeah, it's really touching to think about as I say it now. But yeah, that's what he said. And it was like all four of us who were there were like, okay, like you don't say no to Jack. You do this, right? This is what you do. And he was always a strong supporter of the band, like came to so many shows. And we eventually like reached out to Justin when it seemed to be more of a likelihood that this could really happen. And he was on board. And so, yeah, we did that show in 2011 at Maxwell's. And that was amazing. It was so fun to rehearse for those shows and connect again, and just to remember how it felt to play that music again and not have sort of this kind of albatross hanging over us. And yeah, and just to play that show and see, I didn't know, I mean, Maxwell's was a pretty small spot, but I don't know, it maybe held 300 people, something like that. And, and the fact that it was like sold out and, a whole bunch of people had come to see us. And we were like, it was just a really nice feeling to be back there and play there and have all those people show up to support us.
Was there a conversation about you guys? Well, actually, no, because you guys, obviously 10 years later, you announced in 2021, it says that you were going to write and record new stuff. Didn't you put something out?
So there's a whole bunch of stuff. It's funny that we started out kind of just talking about the beginnings of the band. This label, the Numero Group, they've reissued a bunch of stuff digitally that wasn't available. So stuff from like 94 through 95. So the demo, all the like the early singles, everything pre the first album, Numero has released digitally, and they are compiling that and putting it on. They're putting out an LP of this stuff in 2026. So that's really exciting that all this early stuff coming out when we were teenagers is finally seeing the light of day digitally. We recorded two songs. It's the first new recording that we did last December. So we recorded a song by Shellac, Steve Albini's former band, and then a song by Drive Like Jehu, Rick Froberg's former band, is a dedication to both of those guys and the impact that they had on us musically and as people. We got to be really friendly with Steve, and Shellac took us out on a short run, and so we were pretty friendly with Steve, and he meant a lot to us. And then Rick, we played some shows with his band Hot Snakes, but his band Drive Like Jehu was a huge influence on Rye. And it just felt right to like honor them in some way. And so we put out a 7 inch that came out in July. So that's the new recording stuff that came out. In terms of like moving forward, we are getting together and playing. I imagine like we will play live at some point. I don't know when that's going to be. I imagine sometime in 2026 we'll probably play live, but we are trying to hash out some new music, trying to remember some of the old stuff, like the really old stuff, stuff from like the demo and the early singles too that haven't been played in forever. So yeah, I think you can expect that we will play some live shows. I don't know what that's going to look like yet though.
You think you guys will try to? I don't know the last time you talked to the Sleepy Time Trio guys, but you think you'll try to play a show with them because they're still playing?
I know. I think I'm not 100% sure about this. I think they might have reached out to John because John mans our Instagram, which is also very new. It's like 6 months old or something like that, our Instagram, maybe a little bit older. But I think they had reached out about playing some shows. Yeah, I mean, I think we would definitely be open to that. We couldn't do it at the time, but I think for the future, it's something that we would be interested in. It's like we're all sort of scattered. I mean, New Jersey, Philly, I mean, we're still relatively close, but it's the matter of like living your lives as in our late 40s, kids and jobs and trying to make schedules work and things like that. So it's just the logistics of doing it. But yeah, I'd definitely be open to that.
I know you got like 10 minutes before you have to get on your call, so I want to end this before that. But I do want to say, in mid 2000 or early 2000s, when I saw that DVD come out for Michigan Fest 2002, I bought that. And I just was looking it up right now. I didn't know you guys were on it. I bought it strictly because Coalesce was on it. Yeah, and I had never seen anything. I actually got to interview Sean, which was really fucking cool. But I had never seen anything with them. So I'm looking through this. I didn't even realize you guys are on it. So I'm like going back when I was watching it because there's so many bands on that. And it was just that one, it looked like a Legion Hall.
Yeah, that festival was awesome. There was so many good bands on it. It was just great. And it was like a huge, just like Legion Hall kind of type of space. It was so cool.
Yeah, it's on YouTube. The entire show is on there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and someone like put the time markers. So you guys are 31:45. So I just like pulled that up and was watching that as you were talking just to see you guys like playing on there. It's pretty cool, man.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it's so interesting to think of like, or to kind of reminisce and go through the history of the band and different phases of the band too. I think at that point I have like pretty long hair.
Yeah, dude, it's awesome.
Yeah,
You got like the at the drive-in thing going on here.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Like,
That's cool, man. All right, dude. For the sake of time, I will end this with two questions. One, before I ask the last one, what would you like to plug? It could be about you, it could be about a friend or a cause, it could be about all of them.
okay. In terms of what to plug, if you're interested in Rye or anything like that, certainly our music is available on streaming services. You can check out the Instagram. There's a lot of old sort of ephemera there, if you will, in terms of like flyers and updates. And I think John tries to keep that pretty active. There's tons of videos on there and clips of us playing and all sorts of stuff. And that's probably the best place to get information about Rye or what we're going to be up to and what we have been up to historically. I don't know if it's still happening, so I could be dated here. A little bit of a sad note, but our guitar player, Herb Wiley, was about a year ago diagnosed with ALS. There was a fundraiser in terms of helping to pay for his medical bills and his care as he moves forward on that journey. I wish I had the exact name, but if you kind of look it up, it's a GoFundMe in terms of paying medical expenses and things like that. So I think those are probably the two things that I can think of off the top of my head to plug.
All right. Yeah, I am looking at your Instagram to see if I can find that link. I'll put that in the show notes.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. All right, man. Last question. What scene ethics do you hold on to this day?
Wow. Oof. Oh my God, that's a really good question. I don't know if it's anything like I'm having a hard time coming up with anything in particular, But there is so much, there is so much in terms of the way I try to treat other people, I think, in my life that's come from being a part of, the scene, I guess you would say, right? Like, I'm so grateful for people along the way who were kind to us and put us up and fed us and slept on our, like, let us sleep on their floors and, just helped us in all sorts of ways that didn't need to. I think being in Rye and being exposed to particularly the scene in the early 90s, I would say, but even meeting the people that had come post that, it's been, I think, one of, if not the greatest teacher, one of the greatest teachers of my life. I wouldn't be who I am without, the scene really, right? I wouldn't be. It's informed so much of the way I think, so much of my views in the world, things that I've gotten curious about and want to explore. I think has largely really come from that. And I'm forever grateful and greatly informed by everything I learned there. But there's so many things that I could speak to, even particularly during that time, like a lot of women that I had met during that time, whether they were in bands like, we toured for a short stint with like Bratmobile and like Riot Girl and like learning stuff about feminism, stuff that I would have never been exposed to. That was like, oh shit, I needed to hear that, or I needed to be exposed to that. And it shaped the way that so much of it has come to shape the way that I try to treat people in my life. It's hard to say one thing, but there's a lot.